In this video, I want to show you how to make a simple pop-up for a number of books that I have. So basically I have this view or grid of books, and I want to be able to click on one and then show a little pop-up on the screen showing me the title of the book, the author of the book, and then a link to the Wikipedia page. Now, I've already set up this page. I'll link to the GitHub code for that here, but the basic idea is that this is a div with a grid. And then for every book, what I have is I have a link to the book, the HTML of the book, which I don't have. These pages don't exist. And then I have these data attributes that contain the author, the title of the book, when it's published, the link to Wikipedia page of the book, and then inside I have an image tag of that book. And so all of these are in the assets folder. So this is The Great Gatsby with the alt title, The Great Gatsby book cover. So that's the basic that I set up, and it's the same for all of them. They all have the class book, they have the href, and then they have what's called these dataset attributes that allow me to add extra information that I don't show on the page, but that will be useful later to extract that, and I want to do that here. So the first thing that I want to do is add a little bit of styling. So right now all of these books are just styled normally, which means they just go next to each other like this, and there's this little gap here, as you can see, so that we could make them look a little bit better. We're going to add a link here and then call that main.css, and then in our file here we're going to say main.css. The most important one I think here is that our images can only have a maximum width of 100%, which means they never go out of the container. Then we want the grid element, so that's the containing element, this one. We want to use a grid layout here. So for that we're going to say grid template columns. We want each of the columns to repeat, and here you can see a little example of what that says. We want to repeat. We want to autofill, which means that it can fill the grid with how many elements that it wants. And then the width of the element can be defined either between a minimum value of 300 pixels, that's the minimum of our screen, and a maximum value of 1 FR, which is basically takes up the entire space. Let's try that. And let's see what that gives. So it looks quite the same as you can see, but now if we start moving like this, they sort of wrap around. And let's see if this actually works. So we're going to go here in the inspector and actually see if our grid has actually applied here. No. And the reason why is because we have to say display grid here. And now we should actually see them appear in a grid. Right, there they are. You can see that they actually appear in a grid, so that's fine. That's what we want. Then in our grid, what we can also say is we can give them a little gap so that it's not the element right next to each other, and 1 rem is fine, so that gives us a little bit of spacing in that grid here as well. And we don't actually are going to do much more than that, but that's our basic. Now the next thing that we want to do is make our pop-up. And the way that we're going to do that is just make the pop-up already as if it's shown on the page, so as if it's visible. So in our pop-up, what we want is we want the title. Wait, let's make a, okay, we're going to make it a bit complex. If we have a pop-up, oftentimes we have a background that we can click on. So that's our pop-up wrapper that just fills the entire page. Then we have the pop-up itself, which is this one. And then we might have something inside of the pop-up. So let's do the book title goes here. Then we have the author goes here. Then we have the image of the book. So let's take a example image here, like this one, and then we can say published in blah blah blah, that's fine. And then we can also give a link to the page itself, so href with that link and then saying read more. So let's look at that. If we now refresh, what happens is that this pop-up just appears below the page. We want this to appear on top of the page, so we're going to say pop-up wrapper, so that's the containing element. That's going to be display, the position will be fixed. It's going to be at the top 0, left 0, so it's all the way at the top here and it doesn't scroll. So now if we save, you can see it sort of goes over this page here because this is just right here. And let's give it a little bit of a background, so we can use RGBA color here, so that whenever the pop-up appears, it's going to be transparent. It has to have a width of 100 view width, so basically the whole width of the page, and 100 view height. This takes up the whole page. And then what's important is that this is going to say, well, the input or the inside, what's inside me, which is the actual pop-up, because remember, it's just a wrapper. We want this to be centered. So let's do that. And then the actual pop-up, now the background of that can be white. We can actually see it. We want to have some padding so that we actually have some spacing there, maybe a bit of border radius of 5 pixels. And maybe give it a box shadow as well. So 0, let's say 5 pixels, 10 pixels, like this. All right, cool, that looks a bit better. So we have our book title, our author, then the text of the pop-up, or the image here, and then published, and then read more. Of course, we can tweak the fonts. Let's do a very simple font stack here. Actually, just sans serif, and the font size is going to be 1 rem. Not sure if that does very much. And then here, of course, for every element in the pop-up, we can style that individual as well. So we can say, well, we want the title to go here, but no margin. We want the H2 to have a slightly smaller font size. Maybe we do want a bit of margin here, so we can say margin bottom is maybe a bit more here, and same for pop-up H2. Again, this is super basic, but it's just enough for us to show the entire pop-up here. Now, of course, this whole thing is in the way, and it's also not dynamic. So how do we change that? This is where the JavaScript comes in. So by default, we're going to hide this pop-up, right? Because we don't want the pop-up to be visible. So here for the pop-up wrapper, which is the whole element, we're going to say display none, so we don't see it. So now, oh yeah, and we have display flex here, so it's either one or the other. But here we want to say display none, so the pop-up is not visible here. We can also, just to make it clear, we can also put that here, style equals display none, and that makes it clear that this element won't be displayed. So you can sort of read from the page that, okay, this pop-up is here, ready to be used, but it's not used right now. The other thing that we're going to do here is going to give all of these things names. So we're going to say, well, this is the pop-up title, this is the pop-up author, the image is the pop-up book image, and this is the pop-up published. You get the idea. And then this is the pop-up link. And the reason why we do this is because we need to refer to these elements in JavaScript later on. All right, so let's do that now. Let's make a JavaScript link, and we're going to add this to the bottom of our page because that allows us to use that element only after the whole page is loaded, because otherwise it will look for elements that aren't there yet. The JavaScript will execute immediately, which means that it will execute the moment that it sees this page. So if you put it at the top, like here, not this one, but like this, if you put it here, it's like all of this page hasn't loaded yet. So if we then start referring to the elements, saying, okay, if you click on this element, then that happens, it says, which elements? I don't have any. So by putting it at the bottom here, it will see the entire page, and it will be able to load the entire page here for us. So here we're going to do, we want to listen to an event basically. So we want to have all of these books selected. So we do query selector all. We all select on book. This is a class, so we have to do .e with the dot. And then we can say for each of these books, we are going to do something. And specifically, we're going to, let's close this down here first. So for each of these books, we want to add an event listener. So when the user clicks on a book, what should happen? Well, we want the pop-up to appear, right? So if a book is being clicked on, we want the pop-up to appear. And for that, we're going to select these elements from the book. So we're going to say document, query selector, and we're going to select pop-up title, for example, as a first element. Note that this is a ID, so we need to have this hashtag here. And the title is going to be set to inner HTML. So that means the content of this is going to be set to book.dataset.title. So the dataset is actually referring to this element. So if we want to refer to it in JavaScript, we call it dataset. So dataset.title is the same as data-title. So that will change the name of that title here. And this is the thing that we do for all of these elements. So we did it for the title now. We can do it for the author. We can do it for the year, although here it's important to actually see that it says pop-up published. So the name of this is published, but the dataset year is just the year itself. So it's just this. This is not actually the whole thing, because the whole string says published in 1925. And to do that, we are going to use these template strings. We use these backticks here, and then we can write published in, and then we use $ and these curly braces around it, and that will fill in that published date inside of this. So instead of saying published in book dataset published, it will say the value that's in there, which is exactly what we want. Then the image we also want to fill in, so we're going to say pop-up book image. Here we don't want inner HTML, we want this source attribute to change. So we just say source equals, and then the source is actually not the book itself, but is this source element. So because there's an image already in that element, so we can ask for book query selector image. So inside of the book there's an image, and it's that source that we want to set to the same as the image itself. And then the last one is link. So document query selector pop-up link. And here we also don't want to change the text. The text will always be read more, but we want to change the href attribute. And that's set to book.dataset.link. So that's this one. All right, that should be it. So those are all the values that we have to set for our pop-up. And then, of course, we need to show the pop-up the moment that we have clicked on it. So we are going to say document query selector. And then now we're going to select pop-up wrapper. So note that this is a class, so we have to write like this. And then we say style display. Oops, not like this. Style display equals flex. Note that we use flex here because that's the one that we set here. So that's the one we have to use. So let's see if that works. If we now click on a book, we see that we get a pop-up, and then immediately we see the page going to that page here. And that's because we are using these links here, and they have hrefs. So basically here we have to say, well, if you click on it, that's going to trigger an event. And we want to prevent the default action of the event, which is going to the link to happen. So we're going to say prevent default, and that will show us the book. Now we can't click on the next one because our thing is overlaid here. So there's one extra thing that we have to do. So we're going to select the pop-up wrapper element. And we're going to add an event listener here, a click event listener. So that if we click on the background of the page, then what happens is that we are going to set the element to none. Let's see what that happens here. Yeah, there's a reason why this code is a bit more complex than you would think, and that has to do with this, and I'll show you why. If we don't include this, what happens is that anywhere we click on this, that will hide the pop-up, which is not exactly what we want. So if we click on the pop-up wrapper, we can also, it could be that we click on an element itself as well. So we're checking that we're actually clicking on the right element, the pop-up wrapper, and not an element before, and then we hide that pop-up wrapper by setting display to none. And that should be enough to actually do pop-ups in our page. There you go.